incredibly important, and it's kind of like I told you before, I studied broadcast television and cable television, how everybody in the 1980s said, oh, the broadcast stations are going to go under now that we have this great, 500 channel cable system. That's not true. Mass audience still goes to broadcast television first. Same thing with broadcast radio. All the research done by all the independent research companies all still show that younger audience go to broadcast radio for new music discovery above all other forms of media. What they don't do any longer is they don't spend a lot of time with it, because what they do is they go to broadcast radio, they hear new artists, and then they follow up with the internet. They'll download into their iPods, and then they'll listen to the artists, but they continue to go back to broadcast radio for that discovery process, which is something that makes what we do very successful, because we market that we have a 2-hour block of time that's nothing but new music. And then when we reach out to our consumer base, the listeners, we let them know what time that we air and when they can tune in for this new music. And it creates appointment listening, which is a trend that's in television. Well, it's now starting to show up in radio. Time spent listening is starting to decline, but the audience is not shrinking. It's still there. It just doesn't spend as much time with it as it did. So radio has to kind of use, the broadcast airwaves in a new form, and they have to incorporate, other media platforms such as the internet and the websites to kind of follow up and keep the listener and the audience and the consumer for a longer period of time. Online radio, I think it's a great thing, but it creates a problem because there's a lot of online radio stations out there, and it creates clutter in the market. There's no focus, and just like any other business, if you have 500 restaurants that are mediocre and one really great restaurant, it kind of takes away from what could be, rather than, sometimes you want quality, not quantity. Unfortunately, with a lot of online stations, because it's so easy to do, what you get is a lot of quantity and low quality, and that affects the overall, product itself, the entire product. So we like online radio, but we don't venture into it because of that. What I'd like to see happen is for, the major players to start to take over and some of the smaller online shows to go away, so that the mass audience, those numbers can come back. Because again, most business models are based on numbers, people numbers. And so if you've got all of those people divided amongst 100,000 stations rather than 100 really good ones, then they're not going to stay viable, and they're all just going to pop up and go away very quickly. It's the same thing that's going to happen. It's just dividing the pie. There are only so many people that listen to music in a certain area. Satellite radio, it's great because you can have stations with no commercial interruption. But what happens, just the satellite stations that are in existence today, they can't make enough money. The business models cannot make enough money because they've divided the pie. And again, they divided it so that nobody can remain viable. Where if there's a really strong or several strong leaders in the industry, then the mass can be divided so that they can still get enough revenue from that to remain viable. HD radio is the most horrible thing that can happen to broadcast radio, because it's like cable and television. And what's going to happen is several different issues are going to take place. First of all, the amount of money the radio stations have to sink into the technology to have HD signals. That's a lot of money. Radio stations barely make it because they don't have as much advertising revenue coming in as they did. So then they've got to sink more money into this HD technology that is going to just divide the audience again. So a company that's in a market that has 4 stations is now going to have the possibility of having 2 to 10 additional HD stations. Where are they going to get the money to provide content for all those stations? Are they going to hire all new jocks to run those stations? They've got not only the technology, but you've got, content, talent. You've got a lot going into it. And there's no real true value when you've only got 100,000 listeners in a market, and suddenly you go from 2 stations to 10. You still only have 100,000 people out there, to get to listen to your station and to sell that to the advertising agencies. So what are you going to do when your pie is suddenly cut into 50 pieces instead of 5? it's going to create a lot of chaos. They're going to get less and less revenue coming from it because advertisers are going to get frustrated. They're going to look for mass audience other places because they don't want to deal with all of that clutter and this, all the people being in different places. It becomes very difficult to generate revenue that way. And the same thing with cable television. You turn on TNT today, and they say, oh, it's going to really affect broadcast stations. Well, what's the content on TNT? It's what you find on the major networks, because a lot of the smaller networks can't provide, they don't have enough funding to produce unique programming all day long. It's an expensive process. So you really have a problem where the HD stations, where are they going to get new programs? Where are they going to get all of this new music? There's only so much out there, and it takes people and time and money to put it all together so that it's quality. Again, quality versus quantity. It's a double-edged sword. You've got niche, but a lot of the research show that the niche broadcasting, it's great at first, but if you look at long-term trends, what happens is, for example, you hear a lot of the research on broadcast stations, like, where rock got very niched into certain genres of just rock music. What happens is listeners start having content fatigue. Instead of having, a lot of content in that niche, they end up repeating artists and songs over and over and over. So it's kind of a dangerous thing. It's great that it's niched. And again, my company, we rely on that. Our niche is that we only play independent and unsigned artists. So it's all new, it's all unheard of. So we rely on the niche, in that formula. But again, to get too niched, if we, like local programs on radio stations where they only play local artists, the first 6 months, the trend is the first 6 months to a year, the show is huge in the market. They have lots of support, there's lots of goodwill. Then after that, they run out of new bands to play. It's like the same people over and over and over. There's an occasional new, artist or a new band that crops in, but listeners start to fade, the consumer starts to go away because they get tired of hearing the same thing over and over. So it's kind of like a dangerous thing where you have the good where you're providing the niche, something that people really like, so you get that target, that very specific audience, consumer. But then again, you get the fatigue because they get tired of, it gets stale very quickly.